All right, well, I may as well get started. I just wanted to thank you all for coming along to our third webinar here. This one is about how we can best support international students to ensure their safety and well-being during the COVID-19 crisis. My name is James Martin. I run Insider Guides. We create guides and online content to prepare, welcome and support international students in Australia. We also help organizations promote their brand to international students. And we have a team of writers and editors, and we're always producing content, white label content for which is student-focused content for organizations who just want to use that content in their own channel. So if that's of interest, please do get in touch. We used to bring the sector together for networking drinks in every city around Australia, and share best practice and have guest speakers and things like that. But as that's off the table, and as many things at the moment, we're now taking these all online, and we will be doing these every week. Next Thursday, we've actually got it's a different day, and it's actually more of a student-focused webinar. We've actually got the Fair Work Ombudsman, who a bit of an exclusive actually. This is the first time they've addressed workplace law via webinar since the COVID crisis started. So they've got in touch with us to help international students who are really interested in trying to understand the rights of in their workplace and where to go from there. So really looking forward to that one. So feel free to share that webinar link with your students. We'll also do an industry webinar, but that's still being planned, and that will happen next Wednesday at the same time as this one. So at Insider Guides, we will keep producing and curating content for international students during the COVID-19 crisis to ensure these students have the best information at hand. And we're actually doing work with Austrade and really trying to improve the resources that international students receive, and we will disseminate the best practice information as well from different corners of the internet, and make sure students are getting the right stuff. So I'll send you the link to our little COVID hub there. At the end of this webinar, you'll be invited to complete a short survey, and feel free to get in touch as well about feedback or ideas for future webinars and things like that. This is a Q&A format webinar as well. You'll see a Q&A in the bottom corner of your screen. You will be able to ask questions during this webinar, and myself, Robert and Jenna will be able to answer them either directly or answer them via the chat, or some of them we just may not know the answer to at all, and that is okay as well. I would like to introduce our speakers now. So the first up, we have Jenna Weber who joined Scape in 2017. So Jenna oversees Scape's national operations, including but not limited to pastoral care, building maintenance, daily operations, and work health and safety. Prior to Scape, Jenna has 10+ years experience working within the luxury hotel sector within Australia and the Middle East. Her most recent role involved the opening of a $1 billion property in Dubai, managing the rooms division, ensuring a smooth operation from housekeeping to customer service. Jenna brings a wealth of knowledge in the management of people and large-scale buildings. She's a strong believer that having the right people in the right buildings makes the difference when creating memorable experiences for their residents. Student welfare is of the utmost importance. Adjusting procedures to ensure best practices are implemented within student safety is always at the forefront of everything that Jenna does. Robert Chasse, who is here, also he manages the education partnerships at Sonder. He applies his experience in education leadership and management to the role to Sonder's 24/7 personal safety response network, which helps get by a person's side in under 30 minutes. Robert is responsible for developing and executing effective strategies for international and domestic students to seamlessly access Sonder services. Currently, he collaborates with education and student accommodation partners to offer solutions and specialized support for students impacted by COVID-19. Through meaningful and targeted engagement strategies, Robert is committed to ensuring our student community has access to Sonder's invaluable personal safety and well-being support services. Welcome to you both, Jenna and Robert.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We're all here in the new normal. This is it's going well. I'm happy with the format so far. I may never have to travel again. This is it. Just a webinar for the rest of our days. Oh gosh, I might get.
Then we'd be missing out on the drinks, though, James.
Yeah, I know. You can still drink at home. Okay, so we'll get a bit serious now. So obviously, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact almost all aspects of our lives and has created significant uncertainty for our international student population, both onshore and offshore. More than 500,000 international students were in Australia when the pandemic hit. And I'm reading daily stories of those who have been impacted. We're speaking to students all the time about this and hearing the issues related to their finance and mental health. And the uncertainty has led to additional stress and pressure on students who now find themselves learning online and in isolation. Just last week, unfortunately, we heard the Prime Minister on Friday say that students who are unable to support themselves financially should consider returning home, with no major promises of financial support. Some are now left with very few options. And while some provision has been made for students to increase their work hours in certain industries or access superannuation or some flexibility here and there with census dates and non-grading and grading options inside institutions, many students are still feeling that pressure. So our sector has always been focused on providing the best possible education and cultural experience for international students in what is now a $39 billion per year industry. So I'm interested in what is being done at the moment and what more can the sector do to show that our students, you know, that we're here, we're going through this together and we can support them. And this webinar is all about practical optimism and how we can move together as a sector. This is a discussion. Please do ask questions and we will try and have a bit of a dialogue with you as well. So Jenna, I'll start with you. From a Scape student living perspective, could you give us a bit of an understanding in your role in how you provide support to students?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know Scape all of that well, we provide inner city urban accommodation solutions for students. So whilst bums in bed is always important, we're really focused on providing a year that lasts a lifetime. And this is primarily provided through our 24/7 concierge service, welfare support, and our events program, which focuses on health and wellbeing, social events, getting to know their new city, and academic support. So academic support is really divided up into two different sections. So one being the provision of support while they're at uni and how they can be successful, and then life after uni and how they can be successful in that as well. So my role at Scape is really to oversee the operations in its entirety, ensuring consistency in services, such as the eventing program, housekeeping and wellbeing, which in this current environment has just never been more important and something that we talk about on a daily basis. The customer service, which really comes down to the welfare of our students, where we can find efficiencies, and those university partnerships, which again are just so important in this current environment.
Interesting. Well, that's yeah. Obviously, Scape is now one of the leading player, and I guess with the acquisition of Urban Nest really just happening very quickly in the last month or so, you're now sort of a leader. You know, I think you're now the largest bed supplier for international students in the entire country, and you've sort of landed it at an exact time when students do need that as an option. But Robert, I'll switch to you. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how Sonder works and what you're doing to provide on-demand support and assistance to students and their staff as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, really, our product is essentially connecting humans to humans. So, I mean, our vision is to get help by anyone's side, anywhere in the world, in under 20 minutes. So, I mean, that's incredibly ambitious, but we are actually achieving this in Australia and now in New Zealand. So what we aim to do is we provide a 24/7 multilingual support network of people that are able to provide immediate response and support to anyone in need, and in doing so, we can provide in-person support to, for this conversation, students anywhere in Australia and New Zealand in under 20 minutes. Wow. So if you think of, and this is really to support, health, safety, well-being. If you look on a spectrum of situations from like 1 to 10, so 10 being, critical incidents, things that you would engage with emergency services, the police, and 1 being just very, very small, kind of just questions that you would ask your friends or family members. We exist in that 2 to 9 space, which we have referred to, my background's in student services. That's always that gray area that we refer to. So that's anything that can trigger any kind of anxiety, such as losing passports or unsure of any type of situations. For example, where to go for the proper medical support. Do I go to a GP? Do I go to a hospital? Do I go to the emergency? What do I do? So our humans that are specialized in emergency response. So a lot of them come from 000, the police force. They are able to provide and connect people with that appropriate support. And sometimes, quite often, that support requires us to be with them in person and walk them through. So pretty much being, their friend, their big brother, their big sister, in times of, stress or uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a really interesting business, Sonder. It's sort of, it was funny because when I first started Insider Guides about 10, 11 years ago, it was one of the issues we were trying to solve was there was no clear, there was not a clear understanding of where students went for certain types of help. There was this, as you say, like a gray area where students were in between, like what happens when they leave campus. Is it their accommodation duty? Is it the institution? Is it the state government, local government? Is it the agent? Is it the guardian? And there was so many things that just weren't connecting up. And I know the study bodies were sort of trying to grapple with that. And they, as Peter Mackey said last week, they originally launched as like a promotion body, but they were sort of pulled into the student experience, and almost, I think the state government ended up really focusing on the student experience as a form of, just helping students, but also as a way of, a good student experience is the best kind of marketing as well. It was, and really interesting to see Sonder, a business, just appear there a few years ago and really just flourish right across the sector. It's fantastic to see. So I'd like to sort of move to, I'll structure this in terms of like immediate response, then I'll go to like some of the current student support options that are happening right now, and then we'll talk about what next. So I'll get into the immediate response. Jenna, the Scape has a large exposure to the overseas student market, and like others in the sector did feel the impact of COVID-19 in early January. You moved pretty quickly in your response, and you requested that students voluntarily self-isolate on arrival. You had strict cleaning procedures and monitored travel history. So I'd love to hear about the last 3 months and a bit of a timeline as to how that has unfolded for Scape. It's quite interesting.
That's a really long answer to your question. So I'll try and tie it up as nicely as I can. And I think over the next hour, we'll touch on bits and pieces even more. But really our first email communication and kind of putting a team together and having a meeting about this dates back to the 21st of January, which just feels like a lifetime ago now. And we've come so far since then. So I think, and I'll kind of just talk to you about where we, initially started on kind of day dot and skip through a few things. But I think one of the very first measures we put in place, and we were able to do it with immediate effect, within 2 hours we had it up and running, was the increased cleaning of high touch points throughout our communal spaces in all of our buildings. So I think we're quite fortunate in the fact that all of our cleaning services within our building are in-house, and they're so much more than just housekeepers or cleaners. They're really our Wellbeing team. So it was really easy for us just to go to every single 2 hours. We were sanitizing all these high touch points and the lifts as well. And that was over a 24-hour period, because remember, we've got teams who are on the desk 24 hours a day as well. So it was a full team involvement just to get these buildings consistently sanitized. And you can walk through those buildings and feel really safe. So that was kind of very first thing. Then we progressed to updating some of our forms that we use for every single check-in. So starting to update those to include travel history, flight information when they first arrived into Australia. And these just ended up proving to be invaluable when over the weeks you started to see media releases about people getting in contact with, like the Department of Health if they were on certain flights, arriving on particular days, and they were, had been put at risk. So to be able to already have that information dating back to the end of January, I guess we didn't know how valuable it would be until time kept going on. We also implemented these arrivals forms in our sales process. So if we think back to end of January and February, this was still such a key sales period for all PBSA and accommodation providers. So we needed to keep the sales running and getting people through the door, but you need to think about the Scape community that's already there, the staff, and just the community in general as well. So started to implement some measures around that. I guess then moving forward, we kind of got into that cycle of travel ban being extended, and then students requiring to go into isolation depending on when they arrived. As you noted, we already had students voluntarily going into isolation before it became a government mandate. Fortunately, I guess I feel like we have been on the front foot since day dot, which was great. So once people were going into isolation, we had these essential packs ready to go, which, included cleaning items for the room, toothbrush, toothpaste, toilet paper. I think these packs could sell for a fortune on the streets these days. And also meals that would get them through the first 48 hours until they could, get themselves settled, understand where they could do food orders from and deliveries. We also had prepared processes for rubbish removal from isolated rooms, meal deliveries, and a laundry solution as well.
Wow.
So you don't want students in a room, they've just arrived from overseas, all of a sudden, they're isolated and they can't even get their laundry done. So just trying to make life as normal as possible for these students.
Yeah, that's I can imagine there'd be a lot of things, but I'd love to hear a bit more, but I might just move on to Robert in terms of the types of Robert. This is where I guess Sonder comes into play in terms of the self-isolation and things like that. What have you seen in terms of the trends and the types of support that students are requesting now over the Sonder platform?
Well, some of the trends, it's really interesting just to look at, like a comparison from March, Feb, to even what we're seeing now, just, 1 month into April. It's interesting because Sonder, the technology that students access the support is designed at scale, right? So, and because we're staffed by specialists who have years and years and extensive training in providing that first responder support for pretty much any situation, and that empathetic approach, it really didn't necessarily change our model, but it focused how we're delivering those and providing services in this kind of new normal that everyone's talking about. I call it temporary new normal. So with that, when we're talking about COVID specific kind of trends that we're seeing, in March alone, we have new students registering for the service, all the time, every day. And in March, we've had thousands of new students sign up. And of those new students, 90% of them, just over 90% of them, have been engaged with the service, using the service. And what we found is that a lot of those requests, they are still, very aligned with our general support. And I don't want to say general, but that wide-ranging support, from anything about, scams, assault, medical, everything. But with the COVID-specific one, we've been finding that medical, mental health, and well-being are the primary reasons why students are engaging with our support. And then, just to tease apart a little bit, the way that, we categorize mental health versus well-being, in terms of, COVID support, is that well-being is really just more about that peace of mind. So that uncertainty, those, levels of just stress, or, we had a situation recently where a student was battling procrastination, and then that was leading to stress about, achieving their, academic objectives and things like that. So well-being is really just providing that peace of mind because of our ability to capture all of this information that's going out there. We're able to, validate it and communicate it to our community. So we have access to, some information that isn't always publicly available. So we are able to give them that peace of mind. So well-being, we've seen an incredible spike in March, and aligned with COVID, mid through late March. And then mental health is really more of, those type of pre-existing conditions, anything from panic to, depression, loneliness, or even generalized anxiety disorder. So we're seeing that COVID has been triggering some of that with our student community, and they've been, leaning on us in terms of being able to, get that support that they need. A lot of times what we do is we link them to the support services that are available to them. So we're not necessarily, replacing anything that's out there. What we're doing is we're being, in a sense, that connective tissue to connect students to that support. With our partners, with Scape, we have a thing called agreed protocols. And this is an agreement. It's a live document. It's an agreement between, the organization, the partner, and Sonder on how we escalate situations for their residents and for students. So, for example, with some education partners, or, with Scape, we do link them back into services that Scape does provide for certain situations, or if it's an external reference, it's as per preference.
Like with, I know there's been some questions around the nurses that we've had in Scape as well. And, Sonder and Scape have spent a lot of time, over the last 3 months looking at how we can better support each other, even with the welfare checks, because when students are in isolation, or whether they are or they're not, it's quite a time-consuming process to make sure that we're getting in contact with all of these students, and we're having that every day or every second day contact with them. So just linking in with Sonder, it's just been invaluable. But with the nurses as well, just giving them that information of, we've got them on these days in this city. So if they get information before I do, that someone might not be feeling well, or it could be physically or emotionally, mentally not feeling well, that Sonder can go, oh, I know that we've got this in Melbourne, and we can, for example, and get them there straight away.
Okay. I mean, is that apart from Sonder, how does Scape sort of identify if a student needs that help directly? Is that the main way that or is there an attention on site?
I think, look, first of all, with and we talk about it a lot at Scape, but the 24/7 staffing, and this is, you know, fully trained staff in first aid, mental health first aid. So, you know, whatever you could do at 2:00 in the afternoon, you can do at 2:00 in the morning. And, you know, it's also having that retention of staff as well, that students feel comfortable and always have a familiar face there too. So I think that's always kind of in our minds the first point of contact. But I also find that sometimes, because students do get to know the staff so well, that a personal, you know, circumstance that they're going through, they might feel almost embarrassed to come and talk to someone about that they have gotten to know so well. And that's where I think Sonder's great, because they can get on the phone, they're talking to someone that they don't know, and then all of a sudden you've either got a liaison officer coming to the building, or if it was, you know, a really serious situation, it's, you know, getting in contact with myself and a joint approach of how we can get help to that person.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, sorry, were you going to say something, Robert?
I mean, what I was going to say just quickly is, you know, what Jenna was saying. I mean, it really is that, you know, a lot of times, you know, everyone's talking about student centricity and students at the center, you know, residents at the center of everything that we do. And it really is. I mean, they are at the center. Their well-being is paramount, right? So we have to work together to create this environment for them that's personalized and gives the most effective support for that individual. So it's not a one size fits all, and that's why we have all these things in place. When, you know, when Scape introduced, you know, the nurses, we were immediately informed, and we worked out how this would integrate in terms of providing services, you know, even for the staff as well. You know, if they have questions, they're able to, you know, rely on us to, you know, give them that extra confidence, that extra support.
Yeah, it's that takes me to I mean, it's a really interesting point about how the students interact with all these different elements, and I am curious to know, I guess, how they're going with that. I mean, it could be argued that accommodation providers are some of the safest places at the moment compared with like a share house or, you know, potentially homestay or things like where it's sort of a foreign environment, can't be as controlled. But saw Scape's executive chairman, Craig Carricker, who's joined the last two of our webinars, actually. Name keeps popping up. He's probably in here. He recently commented that even the germs can't get in. And, you know, I think he's alluding to the level of control of the, in terms of the every 2 hours, you can clean these surfaces and things like that. How have you found that students have reacted positively to those measures, or is this something that they're really struggling to deal with?
And I think it's been a positive response. And what we also need to remember is a lot of our students who were just arriving to Australia were sometimes in a country that was much more advanced in the COVID crisis than what we have been. So they were so aware of hygiene practices and wanted them to be there in place. You know, I've never seen so much hand sanitizer used in my life.
Yeah.
And it's
Robert's got it. Get the branding. It turns into a big advert. Oh no, I'm kidding.
So yeah, look, they've been using it. I think we've had really open communication on a weekly basis with our students, but also formulating that communication in a way that they can send it home to their parents as well, because parents who aren't here and can't see what's going on and they're just reading news articles as well, they're equally as concerned. So it is providing reassurance, not only to the resident, but to their family as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the Australian population has responded to this. It's sort of this sort of stoic approach to all these measures. It's quite interesting. I wonder what will happen at the end of it, whether life will ever return. I mean, we just accidentally delved into a whole existential conversation about how humans will interact after COVID. But anyway, I'll move on. I'd like to sort of go into sort of current student support. And Robert, I'd love to sort of dig a little bit into the way that Sonder does help. I mean, there are measures in place to support the mental health of students who are in isolation, particularly those new to Australia, where they have very few networks, very few family members, if any. And, you know, some of them are not willing, I guess, to reach out to former counselors and things like formal counselors they may not know, support services they may not know where to go through universities. So I guess, you know, how do you do it in a way that students find, you know, that it's completely approachable, I guess?
That's actually a really good question, James, because, you know, my experience in student services is you could build it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they come, right?
Mm.
Like, so, you know, we have all these wonderful initiatives and the investment and everything that, you know, education providers, accommodation providers, everyone's, you know, putting together for the benefit of international students, doesn't necessarily mean that they all engage with it. I mean, our approach is really raising awareness, right? Because you have to be aware of this in order to engage with it. And then making it, not necessarily forcing it on them, just making it available. You know, we're multilingual, so any language that they feel comfortable, and anytime, anywhere, right? So in terms of, you know, the support that we're providing students for, you know, isolated students, students in quarantine, is, you know, I'll just talk to, you know, kind of our process with Scape is that, you know, students are identified and we reach out to them, you know, so, you know, they're identified by Scape to Sonder, and we reach out to them, offering them to make an appointment at a time that's convenient with them for our welfare check calls. And that is, you know, again, human to human, somebody from our support center, communicating with them just at a time that's comfortable with the student. And aside from just the, you know, welfare questions of, are you getting enough sleep? Are you exercising? You know, how is your overall, you know, kind of headspace? It's really being able to be there to listen to them. Any questions that they have, you know, a lot of it is, you know, providing information, linking them to information from their academic courses, you know, so linking them to these fact sheets that education providers are updating every 24 hours now, that the students may not be aware about. So linking them to that. Then if there's any, you know, requests, just like, you know, what Jenna was saying, for essential items, food items, toiletries, anything like that, we're able to communicate that, you know, back to Scape. And then of course, you know, Scape has their packages and that, you know, they're able to address that. We
That's
always
pretty
have
cool.
that
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. So
I didn't know they did that. That's amazing.
yeah. So it's again, it's
Yeah.
that partnership that really creates that environment for them.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's a, I guess that's the missing piece, I guess, isn't it? But Jenna, I'm just curious. I mean, Scape has recently announced a $1 million pandemic accommodation support package across Scape and Atira properties nationwide for residents or students or partner universities. This, from what I understand, the package will support both international and domestic students needing urgent accommodation and financial support. Sounds like an awesome initiative. Can you tell us, you know, what that actually looks like for a student?
I guess, yeah, look, we're extremely excited about it. And I think for the Scape community, really it will be addressed on a case-by-case basis at this point in time. So we understand that there's a lot of students and families out there who are struggling at the moment, and we really just want to be able to assist where we can. So yeah, it's $1 million. It's there for our students and the wider community as well, and how we can help to continue to provide accommodation to these people that are in need.
Yeah, right. Obviously, I guess that would come in a bunch of different ways. We heard last week, Study New South Wales is doing some stuff with, I think they're looking at trying to work with Scape. He mentioned it in the webinar about trying to do some bits and pieces with you guys to try and help students. So again, government stepping up, being government. I'm curious. You mentioned you have a nurse on site. Is that a permanent arrangement or is that just a temporary thing?
We don't have a set end date for it yet.
Okay.
To help with the current environment. And one thing that we noticed was, doctor's appointments were starting to get harder and harder. And students who were in isolation for the Scape community and for the staff as well, we were requiring students to just go and get a GP medical checkup to go, yes, you're asymptomatic, you've done 14 days of isolation, I think you're fine to go back out into the community again. So really the nurses are doing two things or a few things for us. So anyone who is in isolation, they're checking on them every 3 days, and that's face-to-face, doing a temperature check, checking if they've got any symptoms or any symptoms they did have, if they've worsened or they seem to have resolved. They can also, tick off on that 14 days and go, yeah, I'm satisfied that this person is okay to be out of isolation. Then just for our students and our staff in general, they're usually there for 2 hours a day in a confined private environment where anyone can go in, have a chat to the nurse, get a temperature check as well. So look, at this stage, we'll continue it on, but yeah, don't have that end date at the moment.
Yeah, of course. And social distancing, I can imagine that wouldn't be too easy to try and enforce that. I mean, everyone has their own room, I guess, but I mean, this is some of these buildings have 500, 700 rooms. How do you keep students not interacting, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's right.
That's not easy. Robert, I'd love to hear your experience. I mean, has your experience been that students are well supported in Australia while continuing their studies rather than heading home to be with their family? I mean, are you seeing students that are just like, I want to get home, I need to get out of here? Or are students, through engaging with your platform, I guess, do you have that feedback loop that it's working?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, that's, where I could really talk about it. I feel that they are. I mean, you were just listening to, we were just listening to what Jenna was saying, that, the services that Scape's providing. I mean, we're doing absolutely everything that we can in this ever-changing, kind of unstable environment that we're all living in. So I really do believe that we are actually stepping up in a meaningful, purposeful way for these students. There are, I mean, we're getting, questions, I mean, just the anxiety of, do I go home? Do I stay? I mean, sometimes they're not even sure about that, because if they go home, it's potentially worse in their home country. So we're
changed a lot as well in the last few weeks. It's interesting, like if you go back maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, you had students who were arriving here from China, for example, and then 2 days later turning around and going back home again, because parents were, the numbers were starting to, go down in China, and then parents are watching the news and seeing numbers start to increase in Australia, and they go, I think what happened in China is just about to happen in Australia, so come back here now. But I think, with all the social distancing and isolation we've put into place, and that our numbers seem to be flattening out a little bit in Australia, and now you can't, really arrive in Australia, but the need to want to go back home is starting to reduce now as well, and it's a little bit more stable than what it was.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? I remember I was speaking to someone from a university a few weeks ago when you could travel technically, and I was in Melbourne, and they were saying to me that they were trying to deal with this problem that students had spent 2 weeks in isolation in Thailand. Like, Chinese students had gone via Thailand, spent 2 weeks, and then they arrived on the Sunday night, on the same night that the 2 week quarantine plan, so they had to spend 4 weeks in total, and it's crazy. And it was interesting to see those universities that acted that had diversified their market at the start, and they were kind of happy that they had done that, because they weren't being so impacted by Chinese students. And then it just turned around and was like, well, now it's everyone. It's not easy. Like, it's killing everyone. No, it's hurting the sector. It's hurting everyone. But We just had a question from Cynthia Fiore, who I actually think she's at Dwell Student Living in Adelaide, actually. Hi, Cynthia. She's asked, I would like to hear how Scape is responding to cancellation and deferment requests, especially from students who are already on site or have already checked in. So I guess, Jenna, yeah.
I think, yeah, we were going to kind of address this anyway during this. So look, for students who were never able to get, you know, into Australia, so whether it was a new student arriving for the first time or someone who went back home over the Christmas period for holidays and then was never able to get back again, you know, we've shown complete flexibility in allowing them out of that contract with no penalty fees. You know, I think kind of the first month or all through February, I think we just spent so much time trying to understand where our students were. And I know universities were trying to do the same as well. Were they here? Were they stuck overseas somewhere? And there is just so many different scenarios. Every day there was something different and everyone was in a different circumstance. So you couldn't just have a one size fits all. So I think, you know, the biggest thing that we've done is just, of course, being empathetic to the situation and the uncertainty around it. And, you know, I feel that we have probably dealt with every single student on a case-by-case basis and come up with a solution that suits their needs. And, you know, some of those solutions are, you know, I've got all my stuff in my room, but I can't get back. So can we look at what a storage fee looks like instead of necessarily just rent so that I can keep it there until I can get back? So it's just been this ever evolving situation, just, yeah, dealing with all of these. But yeah, I don't have a one size fits all for that question.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, I asked the same question to RMIT last week, and, you know, I felt kind of bad afterwards because they were still trying to work it out. They're just sort of stuck in this, like, why'd you ask that? So, Robert, I'll call you Rob. I don't know why I'm calling you Rob. Your website mentions the negative impact that the misinformation of COVID-19 can have on a student's well-being. Just curious to know what Sonder's doing to sort of address that flow of information for that user base.
Well, I mean, that links it up to kind of my previous, or your previous question about trends, you know, well-being. I mean, a lot of it is just information seeking or feeling that they don't have the information that they need, you know, to make whatever decisions that they need to make, whether it's about their health, family, living situation, everything like that. So that is actually triggering. You know, we're seeing it in the data. You know, discomfort, you know, specifically when it comes to well-being. So some of the initiatives that we put in place, first we have our blog that, you know, a lot of people are doing now. We're actually leveraging that intel that we're able to have access to and put that on a platform that students could easily access and in language that they can really comprehend. So, you know, we gauge the level of English. It's quite, you know, direct in its messaging, so it's clear. We try to make our messaging as unambiguous as possible because we don't want you going to a resource leaving with more questions. So we have that. We've been working very closely with our partners in terms of referring students to their information hubs, so to speak, for those particular situations. Like Jenna was saying, it's not one size fits all. There are very particular kind of questions that are personal to the individual. So we just are linking them again to the most appropriate resources that are out there. But we have the blogs. We also have our one of our features that's initiated by Sonder, our safety notices. They have been generally used for sending push notifications to our students who have registered about information, any kind of safety information in the area that they are. So we geofence the area, send that notification to students, and they check in safe or if they need help. And then if they need help, of course, we go through the escalation process and provide that support, however, however appropriate. We also do FYI safety notices, where it's no call to action from the students, just that this situation has happened, just wanted to let you know. So we've been able to use that in a way where we're providing our student community updates on COVID. So anytime there's a government update, if there is a change in our environment in terms of like a lockdown or social distancing, curfews, anything like that, we have been able to kind of leverage that information and send it to our students as well. Again, linking it to the endorsed source so they can access that information. And we've been finding that students are very much appreciative of that. The feedback from them has been, I mean, it's been incredibly overwhelming. A lot of times, because we do sit in that gray area, like I said, we haven't been able to capture this before. And the students are just very grateful to be able to have access to that.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one because, you know, these guidelines, and then there's laws, and the laws are coming into effect so quickly, and state by state, the guidelines are guidelines, and sometimes they're laws. And even in South Australia, where I am, they have a federal guideline on using, outdoor gyms. Don't use an outdoor gym. But in South Australia, it's like, it's not an enforced thing. It's only a guideline. But in Victoria, it's a number of people together. I can only imagine how hard it must be for an international student who has no idea who to trust in this situation to actually get that information, interpret it, and make sense of it. It's hard for locals to really get their head around it. So I guess I'd like to sort of move on to sort of what next. Just sort of, we're approaching the last sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, and I'd love to hear about. I'll start with you, Jenna. Various state governments are in talks with accommodation providers right now, and including Scape, from what I understand, to determine whether it's feasible to repurpose student accommodation facilities for quarantining COVID patients. Is this feasible?
So yes, as you said, we are in talks with a variety of different university, government and stakeholder departments to understand the needs of these groups and identify where we may be able to assist with a dedicated accommodation solution. So we are considering ways that we can support individuals who are looking to, one, just isolate and avoid infection. Maybe there is a group of people who are already infected that need a place to isolate as well. And we're just fortunate enough that we're in a position that we've created an accommodation product that has the capability to isolate vulnerable people. So I guess an example which, is available now is the Queensland government have reached out for support in Brisbane. They needed a solution to support predicted demands for affordable housing for a vulnerable group of people, and potentially to further support the need for isolation within the city of Brisbane. So with our portfolio of buildings up in Brisbane at the moment, we are in a position to help and to do the right thing and to help the wider community as well. I guess it's just important to note that we don't have any cases of COVID-19 in any of our buildings to date, and we'd never put, the health and safety of our current residents, we'd never jeopardise that. But as I said, we do have a large portfolio of buildings, and we're definitely looking at how we can support.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a tricky logistical scenario, I can only imagine, especially in your job in the operations area. It must be a bit tricky. So thanks for taking the time, by the way. Thank you again for taking the time. I'd love to sort of jump in a little bit here, because what happened last week on the webinar with Peter Mackey is that he gave this example of where the government got involved with the student accommodation space and basically put on the agenda for their committee that for their national task force that I believe it was regional colleges, residential colleges were sort of not sort of a necessary service, and that therefore it could potentially just sort of shut them all down, push students out to the student community, and just let them out into private rentals. And they quickly all got together. All those different study bodies all got together on a state level, and the Student Accommodation Association got together, and they were sort of lobbied, and it got off the agenda. And it just made me think, Robert, it does sort of raise the idea, and especially with what the Prime Minister said last week, that students should go home if they can't support themselves anymore. I'm curious about how you view student support on a sort of Australia versus the world level. We're competing with the US and Canada. Canada has done some very interesting things to support their international students. So what more can we do to ensure we're a world leader in the provision of student support services?
Well, I think there are a couple of things to that. Firstly, we really are, we're seeing just by the webinars that you've been hosting, all of the initiatives and all of the support that Australia has been providing, getting, study clusters, education providers, accommodation providers, we provide services for international students, even Sonder, the way that we are coming together, not independently, but coming together as a community of Australians to support our international students. And again, we've been talking about these specific initiatives, just on these webinars, but you hear about them all the time, with Study Queensland and the funding that they're doing in South Australia, the same. In terms of, secondly, I would say competition, when we talk about a new normal, I think that word is actually kind of changing a bit. It's not necessarily about competing to be the most attractive destination or competing to be the best of, service provision for international students. It's really about providing the most meaningful support for the students that are here in our country, making them feel a part of this community, not visitors here in isolation. Really about us coming together. And I think what we do will speak for itself. And I hope that we communicate that to the rest of the world so they will be able to see what we are doing and what we will continue to do. Again, it's an ever-changing environment. Tomorrow could look totally different than today. And the way that we're so nimble and able to come together so quickly to adapt and provide that targeted support, I think is world-class.
Yeah, that's a very diplomatic answer. I'm very impressed by that answer. Obviously, it's a changing situation, and it's global as well. It's not as if every other country is just sort of waiting on the sides to take Australia's market share. Everyone's suffering, so it's really difficult. From Jenna, from your perspective, PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation, for those not the lingo, how would you consider that to be a bit of a place of safety in the current environment, considering what's going on? Is this a sort of a haven for the sector?
Yeah, 100% it is. And I know what Scape's doing. There's so many, if not all, PBSA providers. We're all doing much the same thing now. And compared to kind of just, out there in the residential market, we've got, a confirmed sanitized living environment. We've got 24/7 welfare support, assistance to medical resources, additional security. We're able to lock down our buildings to ensure an environment that's just for residents, and we don't have visitors that you have no idea where they've been coming into the building as well. We've spoken a lot about our partnership with Sonder, but you do have those partnerships which are there, and the partnerships with universities and access to their counselling services that are already set up and ready to go. So you've got all of that, in your hands, ready to go. And I think safety is one thing that we can provide as well, but even on the welfare aspect of things, I guess we haven't really touched on kind of the event programs that PBSA provide and just how that has evolved in the last 3 months as well, moving into this virtual realm. But it is so important. We've got online fitness classes and 5-week fitness challenges happening, and, arts and crafts, to get their mind occupied and distract them from the fact that they can't go out and see their friends. And it's all of these things that really form part of PBSA and why it's so important.
Yeah, that is interesting. I actually, we're actually in the middle of building a little tool to help students work out what kind of accommodation is right for them. And it's interesting when you're talking about that sort of community. So I'll send that to everyone later on, but a little sneak peek for you guys who are just in our little webinar today.
What I'd love to see, just touching on that, what I'd love to see with some of the things I've seen our event managers doing is they've got, don't even ask me exactly what they're using, because it's this, online systems that I hadn't heard of before. But, we've got neighbours connecting with each other who didn't know each other before. And, when all this is said and done, and we could be talking about next year, we could be talking about later this year, but to have people really get back out into the community and already have a relationship with people that they haven't necessarily spent time with, I think that would be really special and kind of something we're striving to achieve.
Yeah, well, I know, and sort of touches on my existential question is what will the world look like at the end of this? And we have a question here from Christina Huck asking, Jenna, could you just clarify what you mean when you say nurses are available? Are they full-time, part-time? Are they available on demand, or how does that work?
So they're Monday to Friday in each city. I'll just take Melbourne as an example. We have 3 buildings here. So every day of the week, they're at one building, if not 2 of our buildings. And if we needed a nurse because we came aware that a student wasn't feeling well, for example, then that nurse would come from the building that they were dedicated to that day and jump across to one of the others. So 5 days a week, they're available.
That's great. And, Robert, I mean, I'm looking at this pandemic evolving and adapting from international students through our communities and institutions, accommodation providers everywhere. And that's sort of where Sonder, has to be in that grey area. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the innovation in the sector of student welfare. And, we're almost at the end of the webinar, and I'd just love to hear a little bit about what's next, I guess, in terms of the innovation and what's going to happen to ensure, what do you think will happen in terms of where students are going to get support from in the future?
I look, in times like this is really where innovation thrives, because we're forced to innovate in order to achieve what we need to achieve. We're not going to just stop learning. We're not going to stop accessing support services. We're not going to stop socializing. So we have to find new and inventive ways to do this. What Jenna was just talking about, how we're shifting that face-to-face, in-person, contact with, events and activities. I mean, we were involved in, quite a few of those. Now we're moving it into a different environment, right? So, and we're getting benefits that we would see, or that we wouldn't have seen in the other context, right? Like neighbor communicating for the first time, things like that. I think the delivery of academic courses that's another space of innovation. How students access support services at scale in a personalized way. I could speak from that coming from Sonder, because that's what we do, but I'm through our partnerships, I'm seeing how, education providers and, our study groups are really working at providing that type of information and that access. it's really, I feel a lot of the innovation is going to come from seamlessly accessing personalized support that we need to, achieve our objectives, whatever they may be. So I really feel that this is going to be the time where we take it to the next level. We'll really level up here in our innovation across the sector.
Yeah, and I guess from a technology company, that's one thing. But Jenna, that's from an accommodation provider being pulled into the innovation sphere. How do you innovate in this time? And what kinds of things do you think will sort of carry on into the next chapter, whatever the next chapter looks like?
It's hard to say what will carry on, and I think we're yet to see a lot of the great innovation that's out there. Look, I never thought that I'd be living through a pandemic. I think a lot of us probably feel the same. So I just think it's a great opportunity to, challenge what we thought the norm was, and start creating these new ideas and changing our processes. And I think there'll be some great things and best practices that come out of this, that already have, and in the months to come as well. I think we've spent the last, couple of months really just week by week dealing with, new restraints or, processes that are being put in place and going, okay, how are we going to deal with this now? And now it's changed again. Now what do we do? And I know the three of us discussed yesterday that I think we're finally at a point in time where things have come down a little bit. We are kind of adjusting to this new world, and things aren't changing every single day now. So I think everyone can kind of breathe for a second and now start to really implement new best practices.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of businesses out there that are just being forced to implement best practices, and they're starting to have a look at their businesses again. I guess it's like they've come home from a camping trip and they've got this big box of stuff they've got to unpack. They're pulling everything out and they're looking at it going, do we even need this thing anymore? Should we even put that back in? I don't want to put that back in the just the way that we're trying to innovate at Insider Guides, and just these webinars that have been really popular isn't I would spend lots of money traveling around Australia, and this has actually proven to be quite an effective way of doing it. But there's other challenges we're facing as well. So but it is fascinating. It is an experiment for everyone, and as we all move through, I think we'll all have a lot to say at the end of it. I think both of you could give amazing keynote speeches at like a big conference or something about the way that you guys have both acted through this. It's incredible work. Before we finish up, I'll just sort of I'll just quickly check on some questions. Judith Tennyson Woods has asked, Jenna mentioned a $1 million support package. Is this only available to Scape Atira Urbanest residents?
Yes, residents and the wider community as well.
Oh, so everyone.
Well, yeah, it's $1 million. It goes so far, but as I mentioned before, it really is on a case-by-case basis that we're assessing this.
Okay, cool. All right, so what else have we got here? Okay, Celia would like to say, would like to know if there are centres or platforms that could help international students and temporary visa holders, e.g. work holiday visas, find jobs during this period, in particular in essential services and any non-essential services that are still hiring. So Celia, there are a few. I know that obviously international students are somewhat limited, but I believe the department put out some more information today clarifying some of the sectors that are looking for international students: supermarkets, nursing, aged care, things like that. So I encourage you to check out the Department of the Education Department and the Immigration Department's websites, because they do clearly, and I say clearly, it could be different tomorrow. So check it today about sort of what are the areas that international students can actually get help on. And I think for the last 7 days, I've not been busier in the last 7 days in terms of trying to clarify messaging for international students. It is so confusing. What's coming out is really hard. And also sort of, if you're being honest, it's a bit disheartening to see sort of all these students getting a bit angry in the chat groups and the forums and talking about how they feel betrayed and things like that. So it's really important that the sector comes together, and hopefully we can do this. We can keep these webinars going and really just try and keep the conversation moving in a positive direction with practical optimism. And I think at the end of it, we'll come through with a with a stronger sector that's more agile and resilient, I guess. So, okay, I'll just check if there's any other questions here. I mean, some of the questions we can't really answer. We don't really know the answers to. Okay, so Zita has mentioned, is the emergency accommodation support available to regional international students as well? So I guess it's people coming from interstate or regional students coming from different parts of the country.
I guess it's hard if we're just talking about just an individual person, or are we looking at a group of people?
Yeah, and that's a hard one. Yeah, I can imagine, because it's all based on okay. Hope that answers your question. I'm sorry about that. Look, I wanted to thank you all so much for joining this webinar. Robert, Jenna, thank you again. Do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to tell we started off with 220, it's dripped down to 150. That's still quite a lot. More will watch the recording. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, I just personally thank you for having us. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure there's only going to be more of these webinars to come. And I think if we sat down and asked the same questions in a month's time, there might be some slight difference.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's we're doing a webinar next week, as I said, with the Fair Work Ombudsman, and I'm not actually going to record that one because I'm concerned that the laws will change in between having to do it, and the students are watching it for weeks to come. So if students are interested in it, that is an exclusive webinar. I'll send you all the link later on as well. Actually, you've probably already received it. So Robert, anything to add?
No, I mean, just want to echo Jenna and saying thank you for putting these together. I know it's an incredible amount of work, but like we've been talking about this whole time, I mean, the whole theme of this has been positivity and, optimism, and being able to come together and, just share what we're doing and provide, links to resources. And I think it's really, really invaluable at this time. I mean, I came as an international student, 2008, something like that. So
I won't ask, it's all right.
So, just looking at how far we've come, since, that time, and, just empathizing with our international student community, arriving here, and then, all this happens, but the amount of support that we're providing, it's incredible to see. And I'm just so happy and grateful to be a part of it. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. All right. Well, thank you again for joining the Insider Guides webinar 3. We will keep doing these. I've got a few ideas for next week, and I'm just sort of putting some things together for that. You will receive a survey after this. Please do check out the online resource portal for COVID-19 on our website. It's in the chat box there. Just scroll up a little bit. And yeah, this will be recorded. I'll send you all the recording. I'll send all of you the recording after this, and you'll have it by tomorrow. Yeah, please feel free to reach out. Let's keep the conversation moving, and let's have a great, a long weekend. But don't go away. Stay at home, guys. All right. See everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.